There's a version of you that's keeping you trapped. You know this already, even if you don't say it out loud. It shows up in those moments when you want to change something fundamental about your life, but find yourself doing the exact same thing you did yesterday, and the day before that, and the month before that. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of willpower. It's something deeper, something more uncomfortable to face. The person you've been, the identity you've constructed over years of experiences and choices and reactions, that version of you is holding on with everything it has. And here's what nobody wants to tell you. That old self has to die before anything new can truly begin. Not metaphorically. Not eventually. Now, the version of you that complains but doesn't change, that dreams but doesn't execute, that wants transformation but clutches the familiar like a security blanket, that version has to go. And letting it die feels like losing yourself, because in many ways you are. But what if I told you that this death is not an ending? What if it's the only real beginning you'll ever have? The problem isn't that you don't want to change. The problem is that you want to bring your old self along for the ride. You want to become disciplined while keeping the habits of chaos. You want confidence while maintaining the thoughts of insecurity. You want a new life while living in the comfort of your old patterns. It doesn't work that way. Transformation isn't addition. It's substitution. And substitution requires something to be removed first, completely, without negotiation. That's what we're going to talk about. Not how to add more to your life, but how to let the old version of you die, so the person you're meant to become can actually breathe. Let me be clear about what transformation actually means, because the word gets thrown around until it loses all power. Transformation is not improvement. Improvement is taking what you are and making it slightly better. Transformation is becoming something fundamentally different. It's not about optimizing your morning routine. It's about changing who you are at the level of identity, belief, and automatic behavior. And that kind of change cannot happen if you're still operating from the same internal framework that created your current reality. Think about it. Every result in your life right now is a direct reflection of the beliefs you hold, the habits you practice, and the identity you've claimed as yours. If you want different results, genuinely different, you can't just change your actions. You have to change the source code. You have to dismantle the operating system. Your current self, the one reading this right now, was built in response to everything you've experienced. It's a collection of adaptations, defense mechanisms, learned behaviors, and repeated patterns. Some of those adaptations served you once. Maybe they protected you. Maybe they helped you survive a difficult period. But here's the truth that cuts through everything. What got you here won't get you there. The identity that brought you to this point in your life is not equipped to take you to the next level. It wasn't designed for that. It was designed to keep you safe, to keep you comfortable, to keep you consistent with who you've always been. And that's exactly why it has to go. So why is this so hard? Why does every cell in your body resist the very change you claim to want? Because your brain is wired for consistency, not growth. It's wired to confirm what it already believes about you, about the world, about what's possible. Neuroscience shows us that your brain creates neural pathways based on repeated thought patterns and behaviors. The more you think a certain way, the stronger that pathway becomes. The more you act a certain way, the more automatic it gets. Over time, these pathways become highways. They're the path of least resistance. They're who you are without trying. And your brain loves efficiency. It loves automation. So when you try to change, when you try to think differently or act differently, your brain interprets that as a threat. It's unfamiliar. It's inefficient. It requires energy and focus. So your brain does everything it can to pull you back to the familiar pathway, back to the old version of you. That's why change feels so exhausting at first. You're literally fighting against the architecture of your own mind. But here's what's important to understand. That architecture was built by you, and it can be rebuilt by you. The resistance you feel isn't proof that you can't change. It's proof that you're trying to change without fully letting go of who you were. You're trying to build a new house on the same old foundation. You're trying to become someone new while still identifying with the old story. And that internal contradiction creates the friction you feel. Fear is the other piece of this. Not just fear of failure, but something more primal. Fear of losing yourself. Because if you're not the person you've always been, then who are you? If you let go of the identity you've spent decades constructing, what's left? This fear is legitimate. It's not something to dismiss or push through with motivational slogans. It's something to understand. Your identity gives you a sense of stability in an uncertain world. It tells you who you are, how to behave, what to expect from yourself. When you begin to dismantle that identity, even if it's limiting you, there's a period of disorientation. There's a void. And most people encounter that void and immediately retreat back to the familiar, back to the old self, because the discomfort is too much. But transformation requires you to sit in that void, to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing exactly who you are while you're becoming someone new. It requires faith not in some external force, but in your own capacity to evolve. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Marcus. Marcus spent 15 years in corporate finance. He was good at it, made good money, had the title, the respect, the lifestyle that came with it. But somewhere around year 12, he realized he hated it. Not disliked. Hated. Every Sunday evening felt like a weight settling on his chest. But he stayed because leaving would mean abandoning the identity he'd built. He was Marcus the finance guy. That's how his family saw him. That's how he saw himself. When people asked what he did, that answer came automatically. It defined him. So even though he dreamed of doing something completely different, something creative and risky and alive, he couldn't move. Because moving meant killing Marcus the finance guy, and who would he be without that? He spent 2 years in this limbo, miserable but paralyzed, until one day something shifted. He stopped asking himself what he wanted to do, and started asking himself who he needed to become. And he realized the person he needed to become couldn't coexist with the person he was. So he made a choice, not to quit his job first, but to start letting go of the identity first. He stopped introducing himself through his job title. He stopped making decisions based on what Marcus the finance guy would do. He started experimenting with new behaviors, new thoughts, new ways of seeing himself. And slowly, that old identity loosened its grip. Within 6 months, he'd transitioned into a completely different field. It wasn't easy. There were moments of panic, moments of doubt, moments where he wanted to go back. But he didn't, because he understood that going back meant resurrection of a self that no longer served him. Today, Marcus runs a small creative agency. He makes less money. He works harder. And he'll tell you without hesitation that he's more himself now than he ever was in those 15 years. But here's the key: the transformation didn't happen when he quit his job. It happened when he was willing to let the old Marcus die. Consider another person, a woman I'll call Alina. Alina grew up in a household where emotions were weaknesses and vulnerability was something to hide. So she became tough. She became the person who had it all together, who never asked for help, who solved her own problems. And for a long time that worked. It got her through school, through early career challenges, through relationships that didn't quite fit. But it also left her isolated. She had people around her, but no real intimacy. She had success, but no fulfillment. She knew something was missing, but couldn't name it. When someone finally suggested that maybe her need to be strong all the time was actually keeping her from connection, she rejected it immediately. That wasn't who she was. She wasn't one of those people who fell apart. She wasn't weak, but the seed was planted. And over the following months, she started to notice how exhausting it was to maintain that identity. How much energy it took to never show vulnerability, to never admit struggle, to never let anyone in. She realized that the person she'd become was a survival mechanism from childhood. And she was still running that program, even though the threat was long gone. So she started doing something terrifying. She started letting people see her, not the curated version. The real version, the one who didn't have all the answers, the one who sometimes felt lost, the one who needed support. And every time she did this, it felt like dying. It felt like she was betraying herself, becoming someone weak and pathetic. But what actually happened was the opposite. People didn't pull away. They came closer. Her relationships deepened. She started experiencing connection she didn't know was possible. And slowly, the old Elena, the one who had to be strong all the time, faded. Not because she became weak, but because she became whole. The strength was still there, but it wasn't a prison anymore. Elena had to let her old self die to discover who she actually was beneath the armor. These stories aren't unique. They're universal. Every single person who has ever experienced real transformation has had to go through this same process. They've had to confront the truth that who they've been is not who they need to be. And they've had to make the conscious choice to let that old version go, not gradually, not partially, completely. Because partial transformation isn't transformation. It's just conflict. It's trying to serve two masters. It's trying to be two people at once. And that internal division will tear you apart. So what does it actually take to let the old self die? What does this process look like in practical terms? First, it requires brutal honesty about who you currently are. Not who you think you are. Not who you want people to think you are. Who you actually are. What are your default behaviors when no one's watching? What thoughts run through your mind automatically? What beliefs do you hold about yourself, about others, about what's possible for you? Write them down if you have to. Look at them clearly. Because you can't let go of something you won't acknowledge. Most people skip this step because it's uncomfortable. It's easier to focus on who you want to become than to face who you currently are. But transformation doesn't start with the destination. It starts with an honest assessment of the starting point. You have to see the old self clearly before you can consciously choose to release it. Once you've done that, the next step is identifying which specific parts of your current identity are actively limiting you. Not everything needs to go. Some parts of who you are should be carried forward, but there are always core elements, core beliefs, core patterns that are keeping you stuck. Maybe it's the belief that you're not capable of discipline. Maybe it's the habit of seeking comfort whenever things get difficult. Maybe it's the identity of being someone who starts things but never finishes them. Whatever it is, you need to name it. You need to call it out specifically. Because vague intentions create vague results. You can't just say you want to change. You have to know exactly what you're changing from. Then comes the hard part, actively contradicting your old identity through new behavior. This is where most people fail. They have the awareness. They understand what needs to change. But when it comes time to actually behave differently, they fall back into the old patterns because those patterns are comfortable. They're familiar. They're who you've always been. But here's what you need to understand. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You have to act your way into it. Your brain doesn't change based on intentions. It changes based on repeated behavior. So if you want to become disciplined, you don't start by believing you're disciplined. You start by acting disciplined, even when everything in you resists it. You show up when you don't feel like it. You do the work when it's hard. You keep your word to yourself when it would be easier to break it. And at first, it feels fake. It feels like you're pretending to be someone you're not. That's because you are. You're acting as if you're already the person you want to become, even though you're not there yet. And that dissonance is uncomfortable. But if you stay with it, if you keep choosing the new behavior over and over, something shifts. The new pattern starts to feel more natural. The old pattern starts to feel foreign. And eventually, the new behavior becomes automatic. That's when you know the old self has died. That's when you know the new identity has taken root. You also have to change your environment. This is something people underestimate. Your environment is constantly reinforcing your current identity. The people you spend time with, the places you go, the media you consume, all of it is either supporting the old you or the new you. If you're trying to become someone new while surrounding yourself with people and situations that remind you of who you were, you're making it exponentially harder. This doesn't mean you have to cut everyone out of your life. But it does mean you need to be intentional about who and what you give your energy to. If your friends are all people who knew you as the old version and expect you to stay that way, spending time with them will pull you back. If your daily routine is structured in a way that supports your old habits, you'll keep falling into those habits. You need to create space for the new self to exist. You need to put yourself in environments where the person you're becoming is the natural response, not the exception. Mental reframing is another critical piece. Your mind is going to fight you on this. It's going to tell you that you can't change, that this is just who you are, that you've tried before and it didn't work. These thoughts aren't truth. They're just the old identity trying to survive. When those thoughts come up, and they will, you need to recognize them for what they are, echoes of the past. You don't have to believe them. You don't have to argue with them. You just have to notice them and choose differently anyway. Over time, the volume of those thoughts decreases. The old identity loses its power. But in the beginning, you have to be vigilant. You have to catch yourself every time you slip into old thinking patterns and consciously redirect. It's exhausting. It's constant. But it's necessary. Because if you let those old thoughts run unchecked, they'll rebuild the old identity faster than you can tear it down. Self-discipline becomes non-negotiable. Not the white-knuckled, forceful kind of discipline. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up day after day. Not because you're motivated, but because you've decided. Motivation is what the old self relied on. It waited to feel like doing something before doing it. The new self doesn't wait. It acts regardless of how it feels. It understands that feelings follow action, not the other way around. This is where most people get stuck. They think they need to feel different before they can act different. But it's actually the opposite. You act different consistently, and eventually your feelings catch up. Eventually the new behavior starts to feel like you. But you have to go through the period where it doesn't feel like you. You have to be willing to feel like an imposter, to feel like you're forcing it, to feel like it's not natural. Because it's not natural yet. It will be, but not yet. There's also a psychological concept worth understanding here, identity foreclosure. It's the idea that at some point, usually in early adulthood, most people lock into an identity and stop questioning it. They decide who they are and then spend the rest of their life defending that decision, even when it no longer serves them. They gather evidence that confirms their identity and dismiss evidence that contradicts it. This is why someone who sees themselves as shy will interpret every social interaction through that lens. They'll remember the awkward moments and forget the smooth ones. They'll focus on the times they felt uncomfortable and ignore the times they felt confident. Their brain is literally filtering reality to maintain consistency with their self-concept. Breaking out of identity foreclosure requires conscious effort. It requires you to question the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are. It requires you to look for evidence that contradicts your self-concept. It requires you to entertain the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you're not who you think you are. Maybe you're not shy. Maybe you've just been practicing shyness for so long that it became automatic. Maybe you're not undisciplined. Maybe you've just been reinforcing undisciplined behavior until it became your default. The identity you have right now is not fixed. It's not your essence. It's just a pattern. And patterns can be changed. Here's something that might surprise you. The death of the old self isn't violent. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It happens in small moments repeated over time. It happens when you choose the new behavior instead of the old one. It happens when you notice an old thought pattern and don't follow it. It happens when you feel the pull of the familiar and you resist it. Each of those moments is a small death. Each of those choices is you letting go of who you were and stepping into who you're becoming. And at first, each one feels significant. Each one feels like a battle. But over time, they become easier. The old self weakens. The new self strengthens. And one day you realize you're not fighting anymore. You realize the person you're trying to become is just who you are now. The transformation is complete, not because you forced it, but because you stayed consistent long enough for the new identity to take root. But there's a turning point in this process that not enough people talk about. There's a moment, usually somewhere in the middle, where you feel completely lost. You've let go of the old identity, but the new one hasn't fully formed yet. You're in between. You're neither who you were nor who you're becoming. And in that space, there's disorientation. There's doubt. There's a temptation to go back, because at least the old version was familiar. This is the most dangerous point in the transformation process. This is where most people quit. They can't tolerate the uncertainty. They can't tolerate not knowing exactly who they are. So they retreat. They resurrect the old self and convince themselves that change isn't really necessary. But if you can push through this moment, if you can sit in the discomfort of the in between space, something remarkable happens. You realize that your identity was never as solid as you thought it was. You realize that who you are is fluid, that it's always been fluid, and that you have far more control over it than you ever imagined. This realization is liberating. It means you're not stuck. It means you're not limited by your past. It means you can become whoever you decide to become, as long as you're willing to let go of who you've been. The death of the old self isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. Because on the other side of that death is freedom. Think about what it means to truly start over. Not to improve, not to optimize, but to start from a completely new foundation. Most people never give themselves permission to do this. They think they have to honor who they've been. They think they owe loyalty to their past selves. But you don't. You don't owe your old self anything. That version of you served its purpose. It got you here, but it's not equipped to take you further. And holding on to it out of some misplaced sense of loyalty is just another way of staying stuck. Starting over means you get to decide right now who you want to be, not who you've been, not who others expect you to be, who you want to be. And then you get to act as if you're already that person. You get to think like that person. You get to make decisions like that person. You get to show up as that person every single day until it's no longer an act, until it's just who you are. This is the power of intentional transformation. You're not waiting for circumstances to change you. You're not hoping that one day you'll wake up different. You're actively choosing to become different. You're taking responsibility for your own evolution. And that changes everything. The old self dies not through force, but through neglect. You stop feeding it. You stop reinforcing the patterns that kept it alive. You stop telling the old stories. You stop hanging onto the old beliefs. You stop engaging in the old behaviors. And slowly, quietly, it fades. It doesn't go out with a bang. It just stops being relevant. It stops being who you are. And in its place, something new grows. Something more aligned with who you're meant to be. Something more powerful, more authentic, more free. This is what transformation actually looks like. It's not a single moment. It's 1,000 small moments of choosing differently. It's not a sudden shift. It's a gradual letting go. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more yourself than you've ever been by releasing all the layers that weren't you to begin with. So where does this leave you? Right here, right now, with a choice. You can keep being who you've been. You can keep running the same patterns, thinking the same thoughts, living the same life. And there's a certain comfort in that. There's predictability. There's familiarity. But there's also limitation. There's also the quiet knowledge that you're capable of more, that you're meant for more, that somewhere inside you is a version of yourself that's been waiting to emerge. Or you can make a different choice. You can decide today that the old version has served its purpose and it's time to let it go. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now, because you'll never feel ready. The old self will never give you permission to move on. It will always find reasons to stay, arguments for why change is too risky, evidence that you should just accept things as they are. But you don't need permission. You don't need to feel ready. You just need to decide. And once you decide, really decide, the path becomes clear. Not easy, but clear. You know what needs to go. You know what needs to change. And you start taking the steps one after another to make that change real. Understand that this process is not about self-rejection. It's not about hating who you've been or punishing yourself for past choices. The old self isn't bad or wrong. It's just incomplete. It's just outgrown. You wouldn't judge a snake for shedding its skin. You wouldn't criticize a tree for dropping its leaves in autumn. It's part of growth. It's natural. And in the same way, letting go of your old identity is not betrayal. It's evolution. It's you recognizing that you've reached the limits of who you've been and choosing to expand into something more. There's no guilt required. There's no shame required. Just honest recognition and conscious choice. The old self can be honored for what it did, for how it protected you, for the lessons it taught you. And then it can be released. With gratitude, with respect, but released nonetheless. Because holding on to it any longer isn't honoring it. It's limiting yourself. What you'll find, if you commit to this process, is that life on the other side of transformation is fundamentally different. Not because your circumstances have changed, although they often do, but because you have changed. The problems that used to consume you become irrelevant. The fears that used to control you lose their power. The patterns that used to run your life no longer have a hold on you. You start operating from a completely different place. Not from limitation, but from possibility. Not from fear, but from clarity. Not from reaction, but from intention. And this shift changes everything. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how you show up in the world. It changes what you're capable of creating. Because when you're no longer carrying the weight of who you used to be, when you're no longer defending an outdated identity, when you're no longer trapped by old patterns, you have access to energy and focus and creativity that were always there, but were buried under layers of conditioning. Your new life is not somewhere out there waiting for you to find it. It's right here, waiting for you to create it. But you can't create it from your old identity. You can't build something new with old tools. You can't step into a new version of your life while dragging your old self along. The door to your new life is narrow. You can't fit through it carrying baggage. You have to let it go. You have to leave it behind. You have to walk through alone as the person you're becoming, not the person you've been. And on the other side, you'll realize that what you thought you were losing was just weight. It was just change. It was just limitation disguised as identity. And you'll wonder why you held on to it for so long. This is your moment. Not someday, not when things are perfect now. The old self is already loosening its grip. You can feel it. That's why you're here. That's why this resonates. Some part of you already knows it's time. Some part of you is already ready to let go. Trust that part. Listen to that part. Let it lead you forward, because your old self must die before your new life can begin. Not metaphorically. Not eventually. Now, the only question is whether you're willing to let it happen. Whether you're willing to sit in the discomfort of the transformation. Whether you're willing to become someone new, even when everything in you wants to stay the same. The choice has always been yours. It's always been yours. And whatever you choose, you'll have to live with. So choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose the version of yourself that's been waiting patiently for permission to exist. Give yourself that permission. And watch what happens when you finally let the old you go.